Good day everyone. This is Dizon, and together with Miss Rich May Laranjo, in this video we are going to show you guys our report, which is challenging the literal, which is also under semiotics. Semiotics represents a challenge to the literal because it rejects the possibility that we can neutrally represent the way things are. In this chapter, we will explore the ways in which semioticians have problematized two key distinctions: that at the level of the signifier between the literal and the figurative, and that at the level of the signified between denotation and connotation. In other words, semiotics represents a challenge to the literal because it rejects the possibility that we can neutrally represent the way things are. So, literally, this chapter involves treating the meanings of messages as limited to their explicit factual, informational, or propositional content. The conventions of figurative language constitute a rhetorical code, which is part of the reality maintenance system of a culture or subculture. It is a code that relates ostensibly to know how things are represented rather than to what is being represented. So challenge rhetorical tropes is also under challenging the literal. So let's first start here. So what is rhetorical tropes? So rhetorical tropes is a sea change in academic discourse which has been visible in many disciplines, has been dubbed the rhetorical turn or the discursive turn. The central proposition of this contemporary trend is that rhetorical forms are deeply and unavoidably involved in the shaping of realities. Form and content are inseparable. Uh, According to Fish 1980, language is not a neutral medium, and our choice of words matters. The North American literary theorist states Fish insists that it is impossible to mean the same thing in two or more different ways. So to say that a glass is half empty is not the same as saying that it is half full. In common usage, we refer dismissively to heated rhetoric, empty rhetoric, and mere rhetoric, but all discourse is unavoidably rhetorical. Figurative language is a language which doesn't mean what it says, in contrast to literal language, which is at least intended to be, or taken as, purely denotative. Hawks, 1972. Somewhat less problematically, tropes can be seen as offering as a variety of ways of saying this is or is like that. Tropes may be essential to understanding if we interpret this as a process of rendering the unfamiliar more familiar. Furthermore, however they are defined, the conventions of figurative language constitute a rhetorical code. Like other codes, figurative language constitute a maintenance system of a culture or subculture. It is a code which relates ostensibly to how things are represented rather than to what is represented. Yet such form may have content of its own. So once we employ our trope, our utterance becomes part of a much larger system of associations which is beyond our control. For instance, when we refer metaphorically to putting things into words, this involves a further implicit metaphor of language as a container, a particular view of language which has specific implications. Yet the use of tropes is unavoidable. So, the ubiquity of tropes in visual as well as verbal forms can be seen as reflecting our fundamentally relational understanding of reality. A reality is framed within systems of analogy. A trope such as metaphor can be regarded as a new sign formed from the signifier of a sign and the signified of So a trope such as metaphor can be regarded as a new sign formed from the signifier of one sign and the signified of another. So the signifier thus stands for a different signified. The new signified replaces the usual one. So the tropes differ in the nature of these substitutions. So a constructionist might be content to insist that metaphors are persuasive and largely unrecognized within a culture or subculture, that highlighting them is a useful key to identifying whose realities such metaphors privilege. Identifying figurative truths in texts and practices can help to highlight underlying thematic frameworks. Semiotic textual analysis sometimes involves the identification of an overarching or root metaphor or dominant trope. So Michael Foucault adopts a stance of linguistic determinism, arguing that the dominant tropes within the discourse of a particular historical period determine what can be known, constituting the basic episteme of the age. So episteme from Greek word analogy, a system of understanding of a body of ideas which give shape to the knowledge of that time. Michael Foucault says that discursive practice is reduced to a body of anonymous historical rules, always determined by the time and space, that have defined a given period and for a given social, economic, geographical, or linguistic area, the conditions of operation of the enunciative function. Foucault, 1974. So let's move on to the metaphor. So metaphor is so widespread that it is often used as an umbrella term, another metaphor, to include other figures of speech such as metonyms, which can be technically distinguished from it in its narrower usage. So metaphors is a comparison in which one thing is said to be another. For example, she is a walking dictionary. So, meaning, it means that someone is very informative, or someone knows how to answer in every definition asked to her. So, metaphors show up in literature, poetry, music, and writing, but also in speech. If you hear someone say metaphorically speaking, it probably means that you shouldn't take what they said as the truth, but as more of an idea. So, for example, it's finals period, and after exams, students are saying things like, the test was murder. It's a fair guess they're still alive if they're making comments about the test. So this is an example of speaking metaphorically or figuratively. So again, a metaphor is a feature of speech that describes an object or action in a way that isn't literally true, but helps explain an idea or make a comparison. So it's like an analogy. So, Lakoff and Johnson argue that the essence of metaphor is understanding and experiencing one kind of thing in terms of another. In semiotic terms, a metaphor involves one signified acting as a signifier referring to a different signified. In literary terms, a metaphor consists of a literal primary subject or tenor, expressed in terms of a figurative secondary subject or vehicle. Richards, 1932. So one example is from Williamson, who takes the form of photographic close-up of the head and shoulders of the glamorous French actress Catherine Deneuve, whose name appears in small type. So dili na nato siya mabasa, no, kay gamay kaayo. So superimposed on the lower right-hand portion um, of the advertisement is the image of a bottle of perfume labeled Chanel number 5. In this advertisement, two key signifiers are juxtaposed. The image of Catherine Deneuve richly signifies French chic, sophistication, elegance, beauty, and glamour. So the plain image of the bottle simply signifies Chanel No. 5 perfume. This is a rather empty signifier when we cannot actually smell the perfume. Though perfume nowadays, ads in magazines have sometimes included a strip of paper impregnated with the scent. So at the bottom of the ad in large letters, the name of the perfume is repeated in its distinctive typographical style, making a link between the two key signifiers. So the aim, of course, is for the viewer to transfer the qualities signified by the actress to the perfume, thus substituting one signified for another and creating a new metaphorical sign which offers us the meaning that Chanel No. 5 is beauty and elegance. So here is another example of metaphor. So experience is a good school, but the fees are high. Heinrich Heine. In this case, the primary subject of experience is expressed in terms of the secondary subject of school. Typically, metaphor expresses an abstraction in terms of a more well-defined modal. So the linking of a particular tenor and vehicle is normally unfamiliar. We must make an imaginative leap to recognize the resemblance to which a fresh metaphor alludes. So, metaphor is initially unconventional because it apparently disregards literal or denotative resemblance, though some kind of resemblance must become apparent if the metaphor is to make any sense at all to its interpreters. So the basis in resemblance suggests that metaphor involves the iconic mode. However, to the extent that such a resemblance is oblique, we may also think of metaphor as symbolic. So, George Lakoff and Mark Johnson illustrate that underlying most of our fundamental concepts are several kinds of metaphor. First is orientational metaphors primarily relating to spatial organization. We have up and down, in and out, front and back, on and off, near and far, deep and shallow, and central and peripheral. The second is ontological metaphors, which associate activities, emotions, and ideas with entities and substances. Most obviously, metaphors involving personification. And the third one is structural metaphors, the overarching metaphors building on the other two types, which allows us to structure one concept in terms of another. For example, rational argument is war or time is our resource. So let's move on to metonymy. So what is metonymy? While metaphor is based on apparent unrelatedness, metonymy is a function which involves using one signified to stand for another signified which is directly related to it or closely associated with it in some way. Metonymies are based on various indexical relationships between signifieds, notably the substitution of effect for cause. So, metonymy includes the substitution of effect for cause. For example, don't get hot under the collar. For don't get angry. Object for user or associated institution. The crown for the monarchy. The stage for the theater and the press for journalists. Substance for form. Plastic for credit card. Lead for bullet. So, a metonymy is a figure of speech in which the name of one object is substituted for something closely associated with it. So, for another example, the White House declared that we are at war with Mars. So, the White House here is a metonymy for the President of the United States. Another example, after leading a rebellion, he seized the throne. So the throne here is a metonymy for absolute power or kingship. So metonymy also includes the substitution of effect for cause. I mean place for event. For example, Chernobyl changed attitudes to nuclear power. Place for person for the British Prime Minister. Place for institution. Whitehall isn't saying anything. Institution for people. The government is not backing down. So again, metonymy is a literary term where a word or phrase is substituted with another related word or phrase. So another example, we need boots on the ground as quickly as possible. Where boots in another word explanation, something soldiers typically wear. While in metonymy, the boots there represents the soldiers. So meaning they need extra soldier on the ground as quickly as possible. So metonymy and metaphor are similar, but they are not the same thing. So metonymy associates the qualities of one word or phrase with another word or phrase, while metaphor, however, substitutes a word or phrase with another word or phrase to draw a comparison to their similarities. So, Lakoff and Johnson comment on several types of metonymy, including producer for product. She owns a Picasso. The second is object for user. The ham sandwich wants his check bill. And the third is controller for control. Nixon, Bam, Hanoi. So, meaning, in the number one, when we think of a Picasso, we are not just thinking of a work of art alone, in and of itself. We think of it in terms of its relation to the artist. This is his conception of art, his technique, his role in art history, etc. We act with reverence towards a Picasso, even a sketch he made as a teenager, because of its relation to the artist. Similarly, when a waitress says, the ham sandwich wants his check, she is not interested in a person as a person, but only as a customer, which is why the use of such a sentence is dehumanizing. While on the third one, Nixon may not himself have dropped the bombs on Hanoi, but via the controller for controlled metonymy, we not only say Nixon bombed Hanoi, but also think of him as doing the bombing and hold him responsible for it. This is possible because of the nature of the metonymic relationship, where responsibility is what is focused on. Lakoff and Johnson, 1980. So, as with metaphors, metonyms may be visual as well as verbal. So, it is argued that, as with metaphor, particular kinds of metonymic substitution may influence our thoughts, attitudes, and actions by focusing on certain aspects of a concept and suppressing other aspects which are inconsistent with the metonym. Metonyms seem to be more obviously grounded in our experience than metaphors since they usually involve direct associations. Lakoff and Johnson, 1980. Metonymy does not require a transposition, an imaginative leap from one domain to another as metaphor does. This difference can lead metonymy to seem more natural than metaphors, which, when still fresh, are stylistically foregrounded. So let's move to synecdoche. So what is synecdoche? Synecdoche is the rhetorician Richard Lanham represents the most common tendency to describe synecdoche as the substitution of part for whole, genus for species, or vice versa. Lanham 1969. Thus, one term is more comprehensive than the other. So some limit synecdoche further to cases where one element is physically part of the other. Here are some examples. Part for whole. I'm off to the smoke. So meaning he or she is off to London. We need to hire some more hands. So meaning they need to hire more workers. Two heads are better than one, meaning many hands or many workers makes the work lighter. I've got a new set of wheels, so meaning he or she has a new car or a new motorcycle or a new bicycle. The American expression get your butt over here, so meaning that he or she should come over here. And another whole part, for example, I was stopped by the law, where the law stands for a police officer. And we have here synecdoche when a part of something is used to refer to the whole. Another example, do you like my new wheels? So meaning, he or she is asking if, do you like my new car? So species for genus, hypernymy, the use of a member of a class, hyponym for the class, superordinate which includes it, for example, mother for motherhood, bread for food, hoover for vacuum cleaner. And then we have genus for species, hyponymy, the use of a subordinate, superordinate for a hyponym, for example, vehicle for car or machine for computer. Another example, I have 4 mouths to feed at home. So meaning the mouth here is parts of people and then people is the whole. Another example, the strings were praised for their excellent performance, where the strings is part of a violin and violins of a violin is the whole. Check out my new wheels, or meaning check out my new car. Wheels is a part of a car and the car is the whole. So synecdoche, a part used to signify the whole, for example, wheels for car, threads for clothes, head for cattle, and hand for worker. So in the picture where the man puts or slides an engagement ring or a wedding ring to her fiance. So this picture symbolizes synecdoche, meaning part of the whole, because the man is asking for the woman's hand in marriage, and it does not simply says that he wants her hand. He wants her hand to marry, and he wants the whole woman, not just the hand of the woman. So another example of synecdoche is that the phrase all hands on deck uses hands to signify the whole sailors. I need a head count by morning uses head to represent a whole person. Nice wheels uses wheels to designate a whole car. It's a cruel world uses world to mean specific people in a particular setting who are being jerks. So a cruel world may also reference an enjoyable experience. Another, Forbes wants to interview me, uses Forbes magazine to represent the individual reporter who will be doing the interview. Another example, I thought she'd go back to the bottle, but she proved me wrong, where bottle here in the phrase represents alcoholic beverages. Can you believe they're charging $10 a glass? The glass here isn't referring to the container itself, but to the beverage it holds. So, any attempt to represent reality can be seen as involving synecdoche, since it can only involve selection, and yet such selections serve to guide as in envisaging larger frameworks. In factual genres, a danger lies in what has been called the metonymic fallacy, more accurately the synecdochic fallacy, whereby the represented part is taken as an accurate reflection of the whole of that which it is taken as standing, for instance, a white, middle-class woman standing for all women. Bars 1974 and Alcoff and Potter 1993. So any attempt to represent reality can be seen as involving synecdoche, since it can only involve selection, and yet such selections serve to guide as in envisaging larger frameworks. So again, semiotics represents a challenge to the literal because it rejects the possibility that we can neutrally represent the way things are. So that would be all for my part of the report. And let's have Miss Rich May Laranjo for the continuation of the discussion of the challenging the literal.